Welcome to members of the university, friends of the university, people that have known Mike, have worked with Mike in various contexts. Just waiting for my assistant here to do some stuff.
Sorry, I had the tracking camera on and it was following me to my seat.
Oh, right. Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. So, we're all gathered here today for a very exceptionally distinguished lecture. I've just got a few of the usual housekeeping things to say, which I've written down so I don't forget, and then just some introductory remarks, as if Mike needs any introduction, really. What I'm going to do to start with, though, is ask all of those online, could you put your cameras on and give us a big wave so Mike can see how many people we've got and who's here? Ah, Richard Yarwood. Hello. Why can't I move it on? Oh, Paley. Hello. Wow.
And if you want, Mark, I can flick the camera onto the audience.
Oh, yeah, so let's get an audience shot as well.
I don't know whether they...
We wave back.
Hello, Carol. Okay.
Terry. Oh.
Are we waving?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, wave. Hey!
No, we don't have to believe it.
Okay. That's enough friendliness and stuff. So, housekeeping. There is no fire alarm test due today. We've checked. So if you hear it going off, it may well be the real deal. Leave following the fire exit signs. We are being videoed, live streamed, and also we have somebody at the back, a fabulous multi-talented PhD researcher of ours, who's doing a live illustration of the lecture. Which that bit we can't stream online, but we will share it in due course. Look, this is a university, so of course in order to organise this, we've had to have a committee, we've had to have task and finish groups, so lots of people have played a part in creating this event today, but I'd just like to thank in particular Aoife, where's Aoife? Aoife and Melissa, who is busy tidying up things and then going back to the ranch for stuff afterwards. But thank you for everyone that's helped organise it. Right, okay. Now to the main event, the main man. And I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to just make a few opening remarks before handing over to Mike, Michael, or Big Mike, as he is sometimes affectionately known. He didn't know that. So I've known Mike since the 1990s. He was my external examiner for my PhD, and then not long after that I found myself living and working in Devon at a place just down the road from here, Seal Hayne, where various people in the room have also been. And it was my first permanent job. Like a lot of people in academia, it's taken me a decade to get a permanent job. So I had this permanent job, I was teaching countryside management, I was doing stuff I liked. And so what did I do? I dragged it in to go and work for Mike on a fixed term contract, having spent 10 years trying to get out of fixed term contracts. And when I was thinking about this, I think I have no idea how I persuaded my wife that that was a sensible thing to do. But that was January 2003, and we've been having adventures in research ever since. And I don't think either of us have really looked back.
I'm going to look back today.
Well, there will be some backward looking today, yeah. Now, as some of you may have noticed, Mike is not a typical academic. If any of you think he is a typical academic, then, you know, you're way off, actually. But sure, he's a great teacher. I've been in the classroom with him, and I've seen how he can weave stories about the work he's been doing and relate it back to academic themes, and how the students are absolutely rapt with attention and they love his teaching. He's also written many books and papers. Too many to count, or certainly too many for me to count last night when I was doing these notes. For a long time, his paper on defensive localism was the most downloaded paper on the Journal of Rural Studies website. It's been incredibly highly cited, and in fact it's almost a law that you have to cite it at every available opportunity. But then there's all the rest. The humour and silliness, of which there's been a great amount, fortunately. And then there's all the impact activity that Mike's been doing before impact was ever on the academic agenda. So I'm thinking of things like being on the Countryside Agency Board, Rothamsted Board, Natural England Board, although not all at the same time, probably, DEFRA Science Advisory Committee, And then, I wouldn't want to miss out things like his role in Hunting Inquiry, the Uplands Inquiry, and most recently a refresh of the Bovine TB Review, led by Charles Godfrey, who may be online, I'm not sure.
Yes.
All right, great. And it doesn't end there. Outside of work, Mike does things like lead Sunday church services, take funerals, and he's a lay canon at Exeter Cathedral. And I had been trying to find the picture of, let me get the word right, Hassock. I said Hassock earlier. Apparently Hassock's what you kneel on. Anyway, this is way out of my comfort zone, to be honest. Also, when he talks about agricultural land management, countryside management, he knows what he's talking about because he's done it. He absolutely knows what a hay tedder is. Devon farmers have been obsessed with hay tedders. They probably kept the hay tedder sector alive at one point. And if he's talking about hedgerows, he really knows, particularly if he's talking about laying hedgerows, because he does it. And in fact, the hedgerow laying season for Mike is about to start any time now. So I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted just reading out this abridged list of everything Mike does. And that, combined with his long, varied career, means he's always got interesting insights into the things that we do as academics and that other people do in the real world. So the only other thing I'm going to say, because I'm in the way of Mike's talk, is that it really does give me real pleasure to be able to welcome Canon Professor Michael Winter, OBE, to give his distinguished lecture on whatever happened to the political economy of agriculture. So the lecture's distinguished, and so is the lecturer. So over to you, Mike.
He's just setting me up. He's already set me up. With her? Looks like. Do I use that? No, I'm using that. Right, we're there. Thank you very much, Steve. And Matt, thank you. Oh, gosh, thank you very much. That's so kind of you. Now, this started off as a perfectly normal, innocent offer to do a little seminar and a little CRPR series. And then Steve and Aoife and Matt got hold of it, and it gradually became sillier and sillier. Well, all I can say is I'm going to give you a lecture. Whether it's distinguished or not is another matter. So, really great to see so many people. A couple of words of thanks before I get going. Firstly, thanks to the university for all that it's meant for me. Thanks to the centre. Thanks also to Nicola Thomas and Henry Buller in geography, who facilitated my Donini money, which has kept me going for the last 3 years. Late lamented Henry. It was so sad that he couldn't be here. We miss him. Also, thanks to all the people. It'll become clear, but this is a bit of a kind of homage to people. There's a few people who wanted to be here in person. I must just mention names there because they're lovely, lovely people who meant a lot to me down through my career, who hopefully most of them online. Clive Potter, Angela Cassidy, Alison Harcourt, Carol Morris and Matt Reed. We're all hoping to be here in person, but illness and so forth took over. Now, I've had great fun preparing this because I have discovered there's a design facility on PowerPoint which I'd never used before. And I've also discovered that there's a draw thing and you can go on and write things. It's been great fun. Anyway, this is the start. Slightly autobiographical. But I went off to Y College, having sort of spent my childhood in Hampshire and going to Devon to work on farms quite often as well. And I went to Y College to do the only environmental studies degree at the time. There were a couple of environmental science. This is 1974. And see that which I highlight, social structure and rural change. That single module changed my life. Because having gone to Y with a geography and a history and an English background, and a passion for farming and a passion for the countryside, I suddenly discovered sociology. And that was through the wonderful Michael Redcliffe, who taught that course. And I thought, blimey, so this is how you think about the world around you. It was inspirational, and it did change my life, because I remember going to talk to Mike towards the end of my time, and he had supervised my undergrad dissertation on Thomas Hardy as well, which subsequently got published in a journal. And I said, yeah, I want to do a PhD. I want to do a PhD in sociology. And he kind of looked at me and he said, I think you're more of a social history person. Isn't that fascinating? Because I've ended up in more history recently. But I did do a PhD in sociology. So off I went and started a PhD with the Open University. So I started that in 78, at a time when Weberian and Marxist approaches were challenging this triumvirate. And I put this here. These days I love all these approaches, but I was young back then. So you know, I was a bit of a terror. You know, lambasting neoclassical economics. They didn't understand anything. Community studies are far too traditional and hidebound. Rural geography, where on earth was that going? You know, I was a bit of an iconoclast. I now realise, neoclassical economics I love. I mean, I love farm business economics. I mean, I've got to say that with Bruce Trail here and Keith Howe. But I genuinely do see the great strength of all that. But there was a lack of understanding of the social context. Community standards, well, actually, they're great. W.M. Williams, one of my great heroes now, and rural geography was doing good stuff. So I see all good things there. But at the time, I think rightly so, it felt as though it wasn't quite where it should be. Now, I then encountered some wonderful works. Property, Paternalism and Power, 1978. Deferential Worker a year before, 77, and Farm Life in North East Scotland of Ian Carter. So Howard Newby, hugely inspiring. Look at the amount of work they did. Deferential Worker, that was Howard's PhD. 233 farm workers interviewed, and he was out in Suffolk living with a farm worker's family. And at the same time as finishing that book off, he was getting into this big study of agricultural sociology, really. 198 farmers interviewed in Property, Paternalism and Power. Huge, huge influence on me. And then this character, Ian Carter. How many people have heard of Ian Carter? I'm sure Matt has. Must be one or two. I mean, he wrote this. He went off. Hi, Andy. Come in. He went off to, I think, New Zealand or Australia. I did have an email exchange with him a few years ago. And he went off into totally non-rural things as a sociologist. But he did this amazing book on North East Scotland. And he did it because he said he went to an area and he wanted to know the area he was living in. He had a job at Aberdeen University. And what he said was, what was lacking was a clear political economy of agriculture, which he saw as social relations of production. Quoting myself here in 1984, because I picked up on this stuff, was incidentally, Farm Life in North East Scotland was the first book I ever reviewed for the Journal of Agricultural Economics. And so the youngish winter continued. And there's more words on this than most of the slides. Newby locates his interest in rural society with an understanding of social stratification and property relations. Social stratification and property relations. Both Carter and Newby, through their empirical research as well as their theoretical concerns, stress the need to avoid studying agriculture in rural communities in isolation. So that was based in a paper in this book in 1984 that I wrote about family farming. So how to look at family farming again, not through the traditions of the community studies, but in a different way. So I was getting quite excited at this point in the late 70s, early 80s. And I'm still excited. You might have noticed that. And then there's this wonderful, wonderful group, the Rural Economy and Society Study Group. So here we have Michael Redcliffe, I've already mentioned here, Michael, Howard Newby, Philip Lowe, the wonderful and lamented Philip Lowe, died too young, wonderful Ruth Gasson, Graham Cox, also no longer with us, and Terry Marsden. And these people were hugely important to my understanding of agriculture that was coming along. Howard had a lovely PhD student I'm still in touch with, who's now a professor at Edinburgh, Graham Crowe. And Howard brought Graham and me and Terry, we were all doing our PhDs at the same time together in a little group. Philip joined a couple of years later, which became the sort of Rural Economy and Society Study Group. Ruth Gasson was really important to me in a slightly different way. Because Ruth Gasson, if you don't know Ruth Gasson, well, here, I shall do this more. Who has heard of Ruth Gasson? Good. Some of you definitely, because I've told you, you must read Ruth Gasson, looking at PhD students. Ruth was fantastic. She was an agricultural economist in the 1960s, 70s who decided actually there was something to be said for sociology. And she began writing about the values of farmers, about women in agriculture, a whole load of things. She's also an extraordinarily nice person and incredibly caring for young researchers. Matt benefited a lot from Ruth. I did as well. She'd take you under her wing, in a sense. I remember her inviting Hilary and me to go and spend the weekend with her in her lovely little cottage in Breed. She sadly died about a year ago. But she was so encouraging. And basically as well saying to me, don't write agricultural economics off, bring these things together, weave them together. She was wonderful. But so were these other people as well. Philip, I mean, my gosh, if you don't know Philip Lowe, well, he was just exceptional. And he and Graham took me under their wing in the 80s, and I had a series of research projects with them. So hugely important people, these, for me, and my development. And what came out of the RESSG was a series of edited books. So this was a British Sociological Association body, and we had conferences and day meetings, and these are the books that came out of it. I just quoted from the first one, Locality and Rurality, but these others came along as well. I was involved in some, not in all, but it shows there was quite a breadth to this. It wasn't just about agriculture, but it was certainly about the breadth of rural society and, you know, at that time. Okay, so this was a particularly important book to me. I must say, for those younger ones here, the painstaking process of producing this sort of thing in those days. This was all typed by a young woman living in Oakhampton. And I would take the manuscript in, and if there was one mistake on a page, it had to be retyped. She was brilliant, actually. She very rarely made mistakes. But that's what we did in those days, camera. But look at the range of stuff there. This was a coming together of a new political economy of agriculture. So you've got these wonderful, wonderful, you know, the Marxist approach, Capitalism, Petty Commodity Production, by Dave Goodman and Mike Redcliffe, and then another, Harriet Friedman in America, another hugely important person for me, on family enterprises. And so I won't read them all, but, you know, you've got big issues, land ownership there, by Sarah Watmore, property-state relations, Terry, and so it goes on, you know, looking at big issues, big mainstream kind of political economy type concerns. And in addition to that, I guess I'd started off personally being really interested in the family farming thing and looking at that in a political economy lens. In other words, how do we understand family farming in a capitalist society, all that kind of stuff. But I also then began to get into politics that lay behind some of this stuff. And this is where Philip and Graham and I really got going. We based a lot of what we were thinking about this amazing book. I'm not going to keep asking who's heard of things that will go on forever. But if you haven't heard of this, Self and Storing the State and the Farmer, published in 1961, this was absolutely brilliant political science book. Because they basically said, right, how does policy work in this country? You know, how, in terms of agriculture, how are these things done by different pressure groups, different individuals? So minute analysis of where the NFU stood, how the NFU was involved in the policy making process, all of that stuff. I still think it's one of the best books that's been written on this whole politics. Forget the agricultural bit, but on politics or policy making politics. So we use that. Graham, Philip and I were a great fan of this book, and we used that a lot. But what we began to do was try to work out what was happening in the politics at that time in the 80s. Just try to get under the skin. So we interviewed people in the NFU, in the CLA, MAF as it was then, and we really tried to understand, you know, what was driving the political interests here. So we came up, this was just a sample of all the papers we came up. There's another wonderful book by Martin Smith, who was a slightly fringe member of the RESSG, ended up as a professor at Sheffield, I think. So there was that side of it as well that was going on. So vibrant. What I'm trying to get over here, in case you've not got it, is that it was pretty vibrant and there was a lot going on. And I'm only skimming the surface, and there were other people doing similar things. And these two fabulous books that came out from some of those people, all of them involved in the RESSG, got together, began to put in research bids. I was on the fringe of this, but unfortunately didn't get involved in the writing. I got other jobs, unfortunately. But these two books, again, Constructing Countryside, Differentiated Countryside, these are big political economy, sociology type books about restructuring, about property, about regulation, about power. How often do you hear the word power nowadays? Well, you do in some quarters. I gave a talk to Natural England Science Conference last week, and I put up on the screen a vision of Stephen Luke's book on power, and said, hey, you people, you're all interested in social science. You say you love social science. You want it in Natural England and elsewhere, but it's all about nudging people in their behaviour and about a little bit of collaboration here and a bit of engagement. What about power that lies at the heart of all this, but is actually obstructing what you're trying to do a lot of the time? We all know what I'm talking about. So, but these books were head on this stuff. They're fantastic books, but they're a long time ago, aren't they? You know, what's happened since, which is what I'm coming to now. So fast track to 2022, a book called Land Between the Moors, which some of you will be familiar with. I don't know why I put that in there, really, just shameless self-publicity. I don't get any money for this. It all goes to Beeford Arts, who helped publish that. And on the back of that book, I thought, I want to do more about this area that I love, the Land Between the Moors. So I got a little grant from Leverhulme Trust in order to go up to the National Archives. Funny you have to go to the National Archives to do stuff for back down in Devon, isn't it? But to do lots of work on the history of agriculture. So I'm writing a 200-year kind of history of agriculture in these little parishes. But it's not going to be quite as parochial as that. It's going to have a bigger theme. And so just trying to pull together some of the strands of my interests over many years, 200 years of growing environmental change, lots on land use, lots on policy change. So you're seeing what happened in my career from that part I've just been talking about to the 20, 30 years was I got really interested in land use and environment and was doing tons of stuff in that area. And I kind of almost forgot my political economy and sociology roots. So again, rather like when I was that naive PhD student, I thought, well, I'll look for what's happened since. There must be new stuff. There must be new Ian Carters and new Howard Newbys on the block. Surely, I can get some good conceptual framing for this book. The follow-ups to Newby and Marsden and Lowe. I came across this. I mean, 2019, it does a reasonable job, especially the bits written by Becca and Matt. But I mean, a lot's happened since then. And actually, I looked at it again yesterday, Matt, and I thought, yeah, it's a goodish book. No, I said myself, it's a goodish book. It's a good book. Especially, as I said before, especially your bits, Matt. They're good. It's a good book. But it doesn't quite have the strength that those earlier things did. And that's mainly because it was determined so much by where we had bits of funding to do bits of work. So there's a chapter in there that comes from one bit of work we had on family farming. There's another chapter from our work on sustainable intensification. So it goes on. So we cover the right ground. But I think conceptually it was, thin-ish as well. It's quite empirical. But it was lovely to do, and I'm so glad we did it. And they do look good, don't they? You will notice that there are no photographs of me in this apart from the first one, which is when I was in my 20s. I don't really want to go any further with photographs. So it's a goodish book. Matt and Becca will forgive me. Well, I hope they will. A lot has happened since, but a lot has happened since then. We were writing that in 2017 and 2018, basically, just after Brexit referendum had happened. But actually, some bits we started quite a bit before, didn't we, Matt?
Yeah, we were a bit delayed.
Where are we going in terms of land tenure and agriculture's relation with the food sector? What do we know about farmers' responses to all the changes and implications within farm families and rural communities? What do we know about the politics of Brexit agriculture, a different world to the corporatism of the 60s, 70s and 80s? What do we actually know about it? There are papers, you can find papers, but I don't think there's anything that really gets to full grips with it. So I took, you see, I told you I used Web of Science, PowerPoint to come up with all sorts of things. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I thought this was lovely, actually. I don't quite know what it means, but it flashed up. I looked at Web of Science, browsing through recent copies of some recent journals. So Web of Science search that I did last week, what do I get? Land ownership. So this land ownership in the title. 145 globally, 3 about Great Britain or England, 1 is relevant. And the one that's relevant, hey ho, it's by Richard Munson and Terry Marsden. And it's looking back at the Northfield Committee. And it's a brilliant, brilliant paper. But it's historical, really. Structural change in agriculture. Someone will tell me off for the search terms I've used. Do that later if you wish. Or advise, to be frank. Structural change in title, agriculture in the topic, 55 globally, 1 about Great Britain or England, not relevant. Politics and agriculture title, 21 globally, none relevant to Great Britain or UK. How about agriculture in UK, England, Britain? 105 papers the last 5 years. So just looking at agriculture and in England or Britain. Long list of 52 papers, potential sources. Don't forget, this is for my purposes to try and frame and understand what I'm finding out in terms of land use and environmental change. Some I have marked up for context, like a lot of work on regenerative farming, for instance, mostly in agricultural science or ecology. In terms of contributions to political economy of contemporary UK agriculture that I can use to frame my arguments, perhaps 6 papers. And these are they. And I'm sure there are others, and please don't tell me off too much if I've really missed something important. But no, just tell me, because it would be useful to know. But these are the ones that I've come up with. And they're an interesting little bunch, really. That first one that I put in Literature-Based Theoretical is a really interesting paper by Coulson, Paul Milbon, another old academic friend. I put it in the theoretical bit because they did have interviews with stakeholders, 78, but the whole paper really, it could have been written without the interviews almost, you know what I mean? It's a really good kind of look at the whole land ownership issue from a pretty radical perspective, and I was grumbling and grunting as I read it because I'm not quite as radical as that anymore. You might perhaps not be surprised to hear. But really good. It gives me some basis to go on, that one. What about the rest? Well, the one, there's some good papers there. That second one, I thought that was Clive Potter. Where's Clive? Oh no, the first one's Clive, yeah. So there's some good papers there. Sorry.
The third one's Clive.
Yeah. So public money for public good. So and that's a good kind of political look, how ideas drive change. So that's a really, really strong paper that I will definitely use. Then I come to the whole farmer survey thing and what's going on in pharma. Now this is really interesting because the first one there by Prince May Ilbrinko and Damien and James as PhD I supervise, people I know. That's a really, really, really good paper, and it's theoretically sophisticated and it's good, but it's based on the county council estates. That's what it was about, because it was a bit of research they got to do that. 60 odd interviews, really good, but you can't read too much from just the county council estates. So they're covering some good stuff about regulation and property, which I really like. So it'll be there. It will be referenced in the book. Janet, you can tell your colleagues it will be referenced. And then there's this fascinating paper, and I'm a bit careful what I say here because I don't want to be seen to be too critical. But it's based on 17 interviews with farmers drawn from 2 farming clusters. All of them are more than 250 hectares, and 11 of the 17 are more than 400 hectares. So we're talking about really atypical group of farmers. And this was part of a big research council funded thing, but it was a very small element in it. And it's interesting to see them talking about post-productivism again, which is something I talked about. I was less than enthralled when they had the reference to my paper as being a post-productivist paper as opposed to a critiquing post-productivism, which was in the next sentence. And you just think, these things just get thrown in like confetti sometimes, these references, don't they? But, I will refer to it, but it was hugely disappointing when I looked at the original title. And particularly, the 17 interviews, bless them, I just don't think what you can get from 17 interviews, to be frank, when you're talking about such a heterogeneous industry. Yes, if you're doing qualitative stuff, of course, richness that comes from that qualitative ethnographic stuff, fine. But this was claiming this is what farmers think. That is more problematic. Okay, so I look in vain, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, for enough detail and rigorous analysis on the politics of agriculture. How much power does the NFU have now? How much? It had a place at the policy table back in the 60s and 70s, the annual review of prices. It was there. That's what people like Self and Storing and Wynne Grant and others really looked at. Now it's more on lobbying, but is it on the inside? Is it not on the inside? I look at Mel here. She no longer works for the NFU. You're now outside the NFU, so you could actually spill the beans later. And what about new body? Oh my gosh, don't get me going. The Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, self-appointed. Whose interests do they serve? Where's this coming from? And then what about corporate interests in food, farming and land? These are the big questions, and I don't see them being answered. Sociology of agriculture, what is happening to farm workers and farm households? Yes, there's some great stuff going on in particular aspects, and I have to, especially as I've been cheeky about Matt and Becca so far, and they're doing some fantastic and big survey stuff on farmers' mental health. Really, really important work. But what about the big stuff? I mean, Matt and I tried desperately hard to get ongoing work going with farmer survey work. Really hard to get the funding. And we haven't done a South West Farm survey for 6 years. Yeah. No, there was one after, wasn't there? Yeah, there was one after, 2020. Yeah. But, we've got no money. We've got no money to do any more at the moment. And they were only postal surveys. That's not the depth of interview surveys that people like Howard did. Okay. Look, I have to say this in the orange thing. That's another nice design, isn't it? Lovely. I mean, the way, all those pretty pictures. Just enjoy it. Right. Contemporary approaches to agriculture and social sciences are more diverse in the 1980s. There's lots of interesting stuff going on, including in the centre. And there's much to commend in the new diversity. I have to say, and I mean it. I'm not just saying that because I don't want to offend people. I genuinely mean it. I love a lot of the stuff that's happened in the last few years. But the decline of the big picture works of political economy has its risks if we wish to develop a full understanding of the drivers of change. Now I come to the bit that some people might not like, but others will love, and I'm going to say it anyway. The three reasons for the decline. I mean, there's probably others. This is just my perception. Cultural turn in geography and sociology, rise of government-funded policy evaluation related projects, and the move towards interdisciplinary policy programmes within UKRC. What's not to like about the cultural turn? I mean, that wonderful book, Carol was editor, Ethnography and Rural Search, brilliant stuff. There's one paper, it's called, what is it called, Carol, remind me, What It's Like to Be Sean or something, by Sean Fielding, reflecting on his field work, something like that. I mean, it's interesting stuff. And then when I looked at this, cultural turns, geographical turns, I found a fascinating paper about music and rurality. And it focused mostly on one of my favourite composers, Vaughan Williams. What's not to like? It's great stuff. But an interesting question. So I'm not mounting a critique of the cultural turn, merely observing that it served to allocate intellectual resources in a particular way. And it became more difficult to get money for the sort of stuff that Howard and Terry and Philip and indeed myself in those 80s had got. It became more difficult with that turn. And then we come to the evaluation impacts monitoring. That's how we made a living. One of the reasons I didn't get so involved in constructing the countryside and differentiated countryside and all that stuff was because I was appointed to head up a little research centre at Cirencester, and I had to find money. That's what I did. And then I moved to Cheltenham before Janet was there, but with Nigel Curry, again, sadly, recently lost Nigel. And we were carrying on in the same way. We were doing, and that's the way we fueled, and we still do, Matt does to a considerable extent. It's how we've managed to carry on being researchers. It's getting lots and lots of money. Well, not lots and lots of money, lots and lots of contracts with some money attached to write lots and lots and lots of reports. I haven't even added up all the ones I've written or contributed to. But I mean, if you take all the ones that Janet and people do at Cheltenham and here, and Bruce when he was at Reading and all those things, massive, vast numbers of them. And I remember this one was one of the big ones that we had when I was at Cheltenham, this Effects of the 1992 Reforms. That was a big project. And I opened it up the other day and I read this. Our conceptual focus lies broadly within the political economy approach to farmer decision making. This approach allows us to situate farmers' management decisions in their wider structural context. I think it was a vain hope. I wanted to say it. And so did Pete Gaskell, who was the main co-author. We wanted to say that, but actually we were caught up in the minutiae of the policy impact, looking in absolute minute detail on what the integrated administration system, whatever it was called, IACS, and milk quotas and set aside and all those things, what that meant to farm management practice and what that meant to countryside management. And we referred to a little working paper that Pete and I had written about the political economy of agriculture for this project. I can't even find it. I looked through my files, I can't find the thing. It never got published, it didn't get as an appendix. We were squeezed out. We were squeezed out by the Countryside Commission and their allies who wanted this relentless focus, as you can imagine. I remember the main thing I remember from that project, they kept saying, but what about the counterfactual? In other words, what would have happened if we hadn't had these policies? How do I know? I mean, but in other words, because what they want to know about the counterfactual, because they wanted to know, what the value added of certain schemes was, which as any economist here will know, and it's really, really hard. So, I just put a little, we've done so many of these, and they really do take time. They pay the bills, but they take time, and you get pushed away from some of your core intellectual interests. And this happened to me for 20, 25 years, basically. I love it. I don't regret anything. I wouldn't alter anything. But it certainly had its impact and its effect. And then there's the interdisciplinary turn. Well, I was a junkie for the contract research, and I'm equally a junkie for interdisciplinary. In many ways, even more so. I loved it. So here we have. I got really involved in a project on farm pollution, fecal pollution, led by the wonderful David Chadwick, now at Bangor University, used to be at Northwick. It was one of the best projects I'd ever worked on. Rob Fish was also involved, and it was fantastic. I'll say why. Any concerns have in a minute. Then there was SIP. That's the amazing Chris Stoke. There were so many people involved in SIP. Chris was fantastic because he just understood farming so well. He understood about growing things, and we'd walk fields together, and he would say what weed that was and what weed that was and what we could do about it. It was brilliant and inspirational time. That was for 4 years, £2 million programme. Well, it was part of a £4.5 million, wasn't it? We were running £2 million worth of it. Again, a lot of social science. Carol was involved, Matt was involved, Becca was involved. Then there's the Valuing Nature programme. Rosie Hales, wonderful ecologist, now National Trust, led that, and I was on the coordinating group for that for, I don't know how long it was, 4 or 5 years. Lots of wonderful interdisciplinary programs. That involved the arts and humanities as well as the social sciences and the natural sciences. Tons of interesting stuff coming out of that. AFN Network, Agri-Food Network, just coming towards its end, but that's been a fantastic programme. I'm one of the 3,000 members of it or something. I've done nothing other than be a member and receive the newsletters. But it's, again, interdisciplinarity, very policy focused, very problem orientated in its focus. But all of that, great stuff, and I would never not want to have done that. But they narrowed down the social science. They really did. The Rowley project's great. We had some nice social science papers in that. Unruly pathogens was a term that I coined, which is a terribly cultural turny type term, isn't it? I'm a bit ashamed of it, really. But we had a paper on unruly pathogens. Yes, we were there for understanding farmer behaviour. That was good. We got a little bit of political economy in it. But you could never do big surveys. you know, I think, I can't remember how many we interviewed for our early project. It was 70 or 80 farmers or something. And it was all about their pollution management. So it was very problem focused, very specific. We didn't get that broad picture of their business, how they were dealing with, you know, with the retailers they were dealing with, how they were dealing with their landlords. All of those things were not really centre place. And that's true throughout this interdisciplinary turn, I think. They're very problem orientated, really good stuff, tremendously good stuff, and great fun. I mean, a lot of my best friends now are ecologists and agricultural scientists, you know. I mean, it really is great stuff. But it did move away. I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if some of those earlier people had been part of this. You know, where would self and storing have fitted into this? Where would Howard, although Howard was an advisor, I think, to ReLU, but, you know, the kind of work that they were able to do is different. So I think that is a really important reason. So we've got the cultural turn, we've got this interdisciplinary turn, and we've got the policy focus that I think really serve to just, it's actually all about resources, isn't it? Yeah, it's about allocation. I'm an economist, really. You know, it's about the allocation of scarce resources. You know, scarce intellectual resources. You go where the money is. You go where the opportunities are. So it does raise certain interesting questions about the politics of research, doesn't it? Who decides? And we, you know, during my time, this will bring nods from people. You know, when I started, it was sort of 40% of your time. Claudio's here somewhere. I remember talking about this with Claudio when we were in politics together. 40% of your time, oh, there he is. 40% of your time for research, 20% for administration, 40% for teaching, and you might get a bit more for research if you bring in some money. Well, I don't think it's 40% anymore. That whole notion of sort of personal scholarship has really come under attack, hasn't it, in recent years? I mean, we all know the reasons for that. You know, it's neoliberal economics in the HE sector, isn't it? Big nods, yeah? and it's had consequences. It really has had consequences for how people have devoted their efforts and what they've done. But that does leave, I mean, I just feel a bit mournful here, really, because that leaves me wanting to find some good conceptual ideas and a bit of empirical backing to put around a book that's not really core about sociology and physical economy. I'm sort of wondering, well, what am I going to do? Do I have to go out and do empirical work? Well, Aoife and I are planning to do a little bit next spring, but it will be a little bit. It's not going to be that big survey stuff. But it's an interesting kind of story, I think. Well, I think it is. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was, would I? Let's be honest. But is there a case of British exceptionalism here? The last issue of the Journal of Agrarian Change was a special one on Indonesia, and a sample of the paper titles: State, Capital and Coercion in Indonesia's Food Estates. Who owns the Indonesian countryside, from corporate capital to capitalist farmers and landlord capitalists? Distributed politics and class dynamics in rural Java. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? So there is political economy going on. And Journal of Peasant Studies and Journal of Agrarian Change are good homes for that. Very few papers about this country. And yet one could argue, I think there's one, I came across one paper, it was a bit before my 5-year span from Terry in Journal of Agrarian Change, that was carrying on that tradition. But this kind of stuff, so there is a British exceptionalism here. And it comes back to that pragmatic, sort of policy-focused, empirical-focused tradition, the Anglo-Saxon tradition, if you like, that I think is still really, really powerful. Because if you haven't noticed, a lot of that early stuff was really radical. It was Marxist, you know, or Marxian, or whatever you want to say. That's what, you know, we were not all Marxists in the Royal Economy and Society Study Group. No, we weren't. There were Weberians. There was a smattering of sort of anthropologists who would espouse any label, or skew any label rather, but there was a very heavy sort of Marxist influence, and of course a heavy Weberian influence through Howard as well. That kind of stuff. Those big narratives have sort of disappeared off the mainstream in many ways. I looked to Charlie to say, no, he's still flying the flag, aren't you, for theory? But I just think those titles are really, really instructive. And I long to see similar titles in our context again, because I think we need them. If we're going to understand, you don't have to be a radical politically, and I wouldn't consider myself a radical politically anymore, particularly. I don't know what I am anymore, because you get older, you get vaguer on religion and politics, let me tell you that. You can see every side and, agnostic on so many issues. But I still think those issues are worth exploring at that level of structure, of interests, of ideas, of all of that stuff is worth pursuing. I think I'm coming towards the end of my allotted time. You wanted questions, didn't you?
Oh yes, please. You've got 10 minutes. Or so.
Well, I probably won't use them because I just want to see what people say. So I argue that it matters. If it's British exceptionalism, or whatever the reasons, does it matter? After nigh on 50 years of my own personal journey for rural studies, I urge colleagues not to ignore some of those approaches from the 80s and 90s, not to eschew big surveys, not to sacrifice those social science concepts and methods that are trickier to deploy in interdisciplinary and applied research. Walk into the corridors of Whitehall and use some of the terminology beyond behavioural science. Yeah? Do it. Janet's going to. Those of you who have access, I mean, my time of political policy engagement is kind of over. I'm not going to be doing any of that anymore. And I look back and I sometimes think I wasn't bold enough. It's difficult being bold when you're on a board of a quango, to be frank. But I think, should I have been bolder? Should I have been more radical? And yet I heard occasionally when people tried to be and they got nowhere. And so I kind of very much adopted the view that perhaps it was just, ever so slow, incremental, just try and get a little nudge there and a little, back to nudge theory and behaviour. Awful. But it was that sort of approach that I came to adopt. But perhaps I should have been more radical. Because I think the consequences of not being radical are in the kind of society and policy that we've got today. I won't say any more about that. I may have exaggerated. It's not been a systematic overview. I will be berated for missing this or that, so apologies for that. But there are certainly gaps, and there is nothing contemporary, as far as I'm concerned, that does what the state and the farmer, property owners and power, and constructing the countryside did. They were brilliant books. Read them again if you haven't read them. I'm going to be reading them from cover to cover for this book. State and the Farmer I've been reading quite a lot for other people already. But they are just so good. Over to you, younger colleagues. That's it.